Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. In this week's video, we're going to show you how to take an ordinary egg
Use a chemical reaction to completely remove the outer shell.
and then use osmosis to dehydrate the shell and then rehydrate it into a beautiful naked Easter egg. Because trust me, your kids are really going to enjoy playing with these things. So stick around because this video is going to be excellent. How many unnecessary egg puns should we put in the video?
5?
Oh, we can do better than that. Extremely better. As we said at the beginning of the video, we're in our kitchen. Some of the ingredients you're going to need are eggs, food coloring, corn syrup, and vinegar. And don't worry, there's nothing explosive about this. The first step in our process is to completely remove the shell from the egg, separating it from the membrane.
To do that, we're going to need an acid to dissolve the shell.
That's what the vinegar is for. So step 1, take your jar and fill it with vinegar. And consider that a pro tip, because we actually put the eggs in the jar first, which is fine, but you have to be real careful about how you place the eggs. If you put the vinegar first, then it's not that big of a deal. Fortunately, our eggs survived the brief free fall transition. Now it was time for us to submerge our egg in the acetic acid, aka vinegar. This is actually a time lapse of the egg that was sped up 700% as it was submerged for several hours. You'll see carbon dioxide bubbles form on the egg's surface, which will cause the egg to float. The amount of carbon dioxide bubbles increases and decreases as the reaction goes on, which is why you'll see the egg oftentimes sink and then rise back to the surface and go back and forth. This is due to the reaction of the acetic acid and vinegar and the calcium that's in the eggshell. We're not going to get into the specifics of the reaction of this video because we've done a whole video dedicated to this reaction. That was an egg catastrophe. Anyway, as I was saying, go to www.homeschoolscienceclub.com. There you will find all of our worksheets, including the one associated with today's video, along with our calcium acetate video that will be posted soon. So I encourage you to go over to our website, download the worksheet, watch the video, and you'll have a complete science lesson for your kids.
After 24 to 48 hours, it's time for step 2.
So for this step, you're going to have to exercise some patience. That's right, this initial step takes about 24 to 48 hours, but don't worry, it's the longest step of all of them. And a pro tip, if you take out the vinegar solution at the 24-hour mark and put in some new solution, removing the eggshell will be a lot easier. With all of that said, it's time to complete step 1 and remove the egg from your acetic acid solution. Carefully pour out the vinegar and allow the egg to gently fall into some waiting hands. And look how big that egg has become. From another viewpoint, you can see how simple it is. Again, carefully pour out the egg, and if you have some gentle running water, you can rub the egg underneath it to get rid of the excess shell debris. It's actually pretty remarkable how strong the membrane of the egg is. Interesting note, it has a lot of keratin in it, which is the same thing you'll find in human hair. And now that the first and longest step is out of the way, it's time for step 2, the corn syrup stage. It's exactly like the first step. Instead of submerging your egg in vinegar, this time we're going to submerge it in the corn syrup. This time the egg itself, not just the carbon dioxide molecules, is less dense than the Karo syrup, so it's going to float when you submerge it into the syrup. That's going to be a problem because any exposed surface area of the membrane is going to dry out, and if it doesn't stay moist, it'll crack and make phase 3 of this experiment pretty problematic. So as you can see, we ended up using an old bent spoon and other blunt objects around the kitchen to keep it completely submerged without being a hazard to the egg. Now, if you really want to take this experiment to the next level, you can easily add a mathematics component to it. All you have to do is weigh the egg at each stage of the experiment. You'll be able to see the different weight of the same egg at each phase of the experiment, and you can calculate the percentage change at each stage. Now, phase 2 of our experiment is complete. The good news is the egg shrinks in size much faster than it increases in size, so this process only took about 8 hours, or in our case, we let it sit overnight. Look how small it got, and it looks kind of like your fingers do after you've been in the shower for 6 hours. I wouldn't know anything about that. To really understand what's happening at each stage and why there's a change in weight and why there's a change in size of the egg, you need to know a little bit about osmosis. And before we can talk about osmosis, we need to know what a membrane is. A membrane is a thin, soft layer of animal or plant tissue that covers or lines an organ or part. Once you dissolve the shell from the egg, you can actually see the membrane that encapsulates the egg and all of its inner contents. This membrane is actually called a semi-permeable membrane. And to understand that, it's actually a good thing that we're in the kitchen, because we're going to use some standard kitchen supplies to illustrate what a semi-permeable membrane is. Because the easiest way to illustrate the point of a semi-permeable membrane is to look at a strainer. Here's our strainer, a solid thin layer, just like a membrane, but only it has lots of tiny holes in it that allow small things to go through. So let's pretend these raspberries are proteins, amino acids, or even the yolk that's inside our egg. And we're going to place them all inside our egg membrane right here. Now we're going to add some water to our egg, and you'll notice that the water molecules flow easily through the small holes in our membrane, but the bigger molecules represented by the raspberries are too big to go through the small holes in the membrane. The fact that some molecules can go through and some can't is the reason it is called a semi-permeable membrane, and that is the membrane that is surrounding the eggs. Now that we know what a semi-permeable membrane is, it's time to go to our audiovisual studio and learn more about osmosis.
Our exceptionally low-budget audiovisual studio.
Good one. Let's go. Okay, let's pretend our brown background here is a giant pool of corn syrup. And we're going to drop an egg right in the middle of it. And keep in mind, inside our egg there are a lot of water molecules. There's also a lot of proteins and other stuff. Now the corn syrup has a butt-ton of sugar in it, and that's represented by the pink dots here. A key is always helpful, just in case we forget. And in this illustration, just as in our experiment, since Mother Nature likes balance and there are clearly more water molecules inside the egg than outside, water is drawn through the membrane to the outside of the egg to try and balance things out. And that is what causes our egg to shrink in size during the experiment. In the last step, it's the exact opposite. An egg with very little water in it is placed, well, in water. And there are way more water molecules outside the egg than inside. So again, because Mother Nature loves balance, water molecules are then drawn inside the egg, causing your egg to get a whole lot bigger. And that process is referred to as osmosis. The process by which molecules of a solvent tend to pass through a semi-permeable membrane from a less concentrated solution to a more concentrated one. So now that the lecture is out of the way, it's time for the final step and the fun part. It's as if McCormick Food Coloring knew exactly what we were going to do. Rinse out your bottles and fill them with water and put your favorite color food dye in it. And to bring it home, you're going to drop your shriveled up egg one final time into a solution of water and food coloring. We ended up doing blue, green, and red, and I have to admit the colors turned out way better than I thought they would. We were really pleased with our results. I don't know what the ideal time to leave the eggs in the solution is, but we left ours in there for about 12 hours, essentially overnight. And again, we were very pleased with how they turned out. There's our blue egg. Here we have our red egg coming out of the jar. That one was my favorite. It was the prettiest of them all, in my humble opinion. And finally, the green egg. Just as cool looking. Just another shot of the final product. Super cool. Your kids will enjoy playing with them and pretending to eat them. So I'm back in the studio. That's it for this week's video. It was a really fun one. Our kids had a lot of fun with it. We did one step a day, so it lasted a while. And oftentimes we would start the experiment over the next day. As you can see here, we had several different experiments going at several different stages of development. I was really happy with how the eggs turned out. If you give it a try, I know your kids will like it too. As I mentioned, the acetic acid video where we go into greater detail between the reaction of acetic acid and the calcium in bones will be linked in the description down below. Go to our website, www.homeschoolscienceclub.com, for the free worksheet and other stuff. I hope you enjoyed the video, everyone. I hope it was all it was cracked up to be, and we'll see you next week.